Hey there, and welcome back to another deep dive.
Ready for round 2 of CISA practice questions.
You bet. We're tackling questions 91 through 120 this time.
Let's see if we can decode not just the right answers, but why they're right.
Exactly. Rote memorization only gets you so far.
Gotta grasp the underlying principles to really master this stuff.
Okay, so question 91, digital certificates. Those tiny things that make online shopping less scary.
Right, how do we know we're actually on Amazon.com and not some scammer site?
Digital certificates are key there, but how do they actually work their magic?
They're like a website's digital ID card, issued by a super trustworthy source.
Kind of like a passport, but for websites.
Exactly. These sources are called certificate authorities, or CAs for short. They vouch for a website's identity.
So they're saying, yep, this website is legit, you can trust them.
Exactly. They check that the website really owns the domain name and that their encryption keys are the real deal.
So that's how we get that little padlock icon in our browser. It means the site has a valid certificate.
Right, and that any information you send, like your credit card number, gets encrypted.
So it's all scrambled up and unreadable to anyone snooping around.
Precisely. So that padlock is a good sign. It means your data is being protected.
But what happens if a certificate is compromised or revoked? Like, if the website turns out to be shady after all.
That's where certificate revocation lists, or CRLs, come in.
CRLs.
Yeah, think of them like a digital most wanted list, but for dodgy certificates.
So if a certificate goes rogue, it ends up on this list.
Exactly. Browsers constantly check these lists to make sure the certificates they're seeing are still trustworthy.
So if your browser spots a certificate on the CRL, it'll warn you, right? Like, hey, this site might not be safe.
Exactly. So it's an ongoing process, not just a one-time check.
Okay, that makes sense. So digital certificates are like an ongoing security check in the background, making sure the websites we visit are legit.
Yeah, all thanks to those CAs and CRLs working behind the scenes.
Okay, on to question 92.
Yeah.
And we're shifting gears a bit here. We're diving into the world of documentation.
Not always the most thrilling topic, but super important nonetheless.
Absolutely. So how long should documentation for an IT project be kept around? Is it just until the project's done, or is there more to it?
You actually need to keep it for the entire lifespan of the system, even after it's shut down.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Even after it's gone kaput? Why is that?
Well, there are a few reasons. First off, there's the legal and compliance angle, especially for systems dealing with sensitive data.
So it's about being able to prove you were following the rules.
Exactly. You might need that documentation years down the line to show you were handling data responsibly.
Makes sense. So it's not just about good practice, it's about covering yourself legally.
Precisely. And beyond legal reasons, imagine needing to troubleshoot an issue years later.
Oh, right. Like trying to fix a vintage car without the original manual.
Exactly. That documentation can be a lifesaver. It explains how the system was built, why certain decisions were made.
So it's like a historical record, a guide to the system's past.
Yep. And it can be invaluable for anyone who needs to understand the system's inner workings, whether it's for maintenance, upgrades, or even just to learn from past decisions.
Okay, I'm starting to see why it's so important to keep those documents around. You never know when they might come in handy.
Exactly. It's like having a treasure map to your IT infrastructure.
Now, question 93 takes us to the courtroom. Imagine a security breach, and you need to use your system logs as evidence.
The digital trail of breadcrumbs.
But what makes those logs actually hold up in court? What gives them that legal weight?
Independent timestamps, they're absolutely crucial.
Timestamps.
Yep, they're like a verifiable record of events showing exactly when something happened on the system.
So it's like having a digital clock that's been independently verified.
Precisely. This helps prove or disprove alibis, establish a timeline of events.
So you can't just tamper with the logs and say, oh, this happened at this time.
Right. Those independent timestamps make the data much more reliable as evidence.
Okay, so timestamps are like digital witnesses.
Exactly. And to make that evidence even more solid, there are techniques like hashing.
Hashing, like making a digital fingerprint of the log file.
Exactly. Any attempt to tamper with the data would change that fingerprint, immediately revealing that something's fishy.
So it's like tamper-proof evidence.
Precisely. That's why these techniques are so important for maintaining the integrity of digital evidence.
Okay, on to question 94. And we're talking about retention dates for files. What's the deal with those?
Retention dates are like built-in reminders, making sure critical information isn't accidentally deleted.
So it's not just about hoarding everything forever. It's about having a system for deciding what to keep and for how long.
Exactly. They help organizations strike that balance between keeping what's necessary and avoiding digital clutter.
So it's like setting an alarm to remind you to review important documents before tossing them out.
Right. Retention dates are key for managing that data lifecycle.
Question 95 reminds us that security isn't just about the digital world. Physical security is still hugely important.
Absolutely. Got to protect those servers and data centers in the real world, too.
We're talking about badge entry systems here. What's the biggest risk there?
The most common problem is surprisingly simple lost or stolen badges.
Oh, right. Like if someone finds your house keys, but with much higher stakes.
Exactly. If a badge grants access to a data center, losing it is a major security breach waiting to happen.
So it's not just about the tech itself, it's about having solid procedures for managing those badges.
Absolutely. You need a quick and reliable system to deactivate lost badges.
And what about tailgating, where someone sneaks in behind someone with a badge?
Ah, yes. That's a classic. Organizations need to have policies and physical measures in place to prevent that.
Things like security guards, man traps, or even just making people aware of the risk.
Exactly. Physical security is all about layers combining technology, procedures, and awareness.
Okay, so it's not just about fancy gadgets, it's about the whole package.
Right. You need the right tools and the right mindset to keep things secure.
Now, question 96 brings up outsourcing. Let's say your company hires a vendor for IT work, but then that vendor subcontracts part of it out.
Ah, the chain of trust gets a bit longer.
What's the big concern in that scenario?
Control and visibility. When you outsource, you're trusting another company with your data and systems.
Right, so if they subcontract, you're essentially trusting someone you didn't directly vet.
Exactly. And that can be risky. You need to make sure your contracts clearly state what can and can't be outsourced.
And you probably need to do some serious due diligence on those vendors to make sure their security practices are up to par.
Absolutely. You can't just assume everything's being handled properly. You need to verify it.
All right, on to question 97 time for a little incident response action.
Uh-oh, what's the scenario?
Event a virus during an audit. What's your first move?
Don't panic. The most important thing is to quickly inform the right people.
So it's like pulling the fire alarm, get the experts involved right away.
Exactly. The sooner you initiate that incident response process, the better.
And hopefully your organization has a solid plan in place to guide those actions.
Right. Incident response plans outline communication protocols, containment strategies, recovery steps, the whole 9 yards.
So it's like having a playbook for handling those security emergencies.
Exactly. It helps ensure a swift and coordinated response to minimize the damage.
Okay, so question 98 is all about disaster recovery planning. Let's say your plan involves partnering with another organization to share resources in case of, well, disaster.
That's a common approach, pooling resources to get back on your feet faster.
But what's absolutely crucial to consider in that kind of partnership?
Geographical separation. You need to make sure your partner is far enough away that a single disaster won't knock out both of you.
Right. If a hurricane wipes out one data center, you don't want the other one to go down too.
Exactly. Geographic diversity is key in disaster recovery planning. It's all about spreading the risk.
And it's not just about physical location. You also need to think about network connectivity and data replication.
Right. You need to make sure your systems can actually operate seamlessly from that remote location.
So it's about having those backups and redundancies in place.
Exactly. You need to be prepared for anything.
All right, question 99 takes us back to the internet basics. We're talking about DNS, the domain name system.
The Internet's phone book.
But why is DNS so crucial in a client-server setup?
Think about it. We humans use names for websites like google.com or facebook.com.
Right. Much easier than remembering a bunch of numbers.
Exactly. But computers don't speak our language. They use numerical IP addresses to communicate.
So DNS is like a translator, converting those human-readable names into the numbers that computers understand.
Exactly. Without DNS, we'd have to remember those long, complicated IP addresses for every website we visit. Not fun.
So DNS makes the internet user-friendly?
Absolutely. It's the glue that holds it all together, making sure your requests reach the right server.
But what happens if DNS goes wrong?
Oh, then things can get messy. Hackers can exploit DNS vulnerabilities to redirect you to fake websites or even shut down entire networks.
So protecting DNS is crucial for maintaining a secure and reliable internet experience.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental part of internet infrastructure.
Okay, on to question 100. And we're talking about digital signatures. What makes them so important for ensuring authenticity and integrity?
Digital signatures are like a digital seal of approval, guaranteeing that a message hasn't been tampered with and truly came from the sender.
So they're like a digital fingerprint.
Exactly. They use a clever system called public key cryptography, which relies on two keys, one public, one private.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
When someone sends a digitally signed message, they use their private key to create a unique signature based on the message's content.
So it's like using a secret code to mark the message.
Right. Then, the recipient can use the sender's public key to verify that signature.
Ah, so it's like checking a fingerprint to confirm the sender's identity.
Precisely. And if the signature checks out, you can be confident that the message is authentic and untouched.
So digital signatures provide that extra layer of trust and security.
Absolutely. They're crucial for ensuring the integrity and authenticity of electronic communications.
Okay, question 101. A classic scenario. A slow system. Logins are taking ages during peak hours, but the system seems fine otherwise.
The dreaded performance bottleneck.
What's the auditor's role in this situation? Is it just to point out the problem, or is there more to it?
Auditors need to do more than just identify problems. They need to understand the root cause and propose solutions.
So they're like digital detectives, searching for clues to improve the system.
Exactly. In this case, they might recommend performance measurements for the authentication servers to pinpoint the bottleneck.
So it's not just about saying, hey, this is slow. It's about figuring out why it's slow and what can be done to speed things up.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that just meeting the bare minimum requirements isn't enough. There's always room for improvement.
Right, it's about being proactive and finding ways to make systems more efficient and user-friendly.
Exactly. And that often involves collaborating with IT teams to implement those improvements.
Question 102, a change of scenery. We're now in a hotel lobby using their public Wi-Fi.
The convenience of free Wi-Fi, but at what cost?
What's the biggest security risk in this situation?
Public Wi-Fi can be a bit like shouting your secrets in a crowded room. Anyone could be listening in.
So it's all about the lack of encryption.
Exactly. Without proper encryption, your data is basically being broadcast for anyone with the right tools to see.
So someone could potentially intercept passwords, credit card numbers, all sorts of sensitive information.
Right. And it's not just eavesdropping. Public Wi-Fi networks can also be vulnerable to other attacks, like rogue access points.
Those are like fake Wi-Fi hotspots set up by hackers to steal your credentials.
Exactly. So if you're using public Wi-Fi, it's crucial to take precautions.
Like using a VPN to encrypt your traffic.
Absolutely. A VPN creates a secure tunnel for your data, making it much harder for anyone to snoop.
And if you're really paranoid, avoid doing any sensitive transactions on public Wi-Fi altogether. That's always a good rule of thumb. Okay, question 103 brings us back to passwords. How can you audit those pesky things?
Well, the key is to make sure they're strong and meet certain criteria, like minimum length, complexity, and avoiding common words.
Right. No more password 123.
Exactly. But how do you enforce those rules? That's where validity checks come in.
So it's like having a digital bouncer at the door, only letting in the strong passwords.
Precisely. These validity checks can be programmed into your systems to automatically enforce those password requirements.
So it's not just about telling people to create strong passwords. It's about making the system itself enforce those rules.
Exactly. That way you don't have to rely on people remembering those complex password policies.
Makes sense. And of course, you also need to make sure those passwords are stored securely using techniques like hashing and salting.
Absolutely. You don't want those password databases to be easy pickings for hackers.
Okay, question 104 gets a bit more technical. We're talking about service-oriented architecture, or SOA.
Breaking down complex systems into bite-sized services.
But where do you even begin auditing something built with SOA? It seems like a lot to unpack.
The key is understanding the structure, how the system is organized, and what it's designed to do.
So it's like taking inventory of all the different parts and how they fit together.
Exactly. A good starting point is the service repository documentation, which should provide an overview of all the different services, their functionalities, and their relationships.
So it's like having a blueprint of the SOA landscape.
Right. From there, the auditor can start to map out the data flows, identify potential security risks, and assess the overall effectiveness of the controls.
So it's about understanding the big picture before diving into the technical details.
Precisely. You need to see the forest before you can analyze the trees.
Now, question 105 shifts our focus to visitor access cards. An auditor is checking them out and discovers that daily reconciliation isn't being done, but no cards are actually missing. Is this still a problem?
Absolutely. Even if there's no immediate harm, the lack of reconciliation is a red flag. It's like leaving the back door unlocked, an invitation for trouble.
So it's not just about the current state. It's about the potential for problems down the line.
Exactly. Without regular reconciliation, you have no way of knowing if a card has gone missing until it's too late.
Right, it's like not checking your bank statements.
Yeah.
You might not notice that money is missing until it's already gone.
Precisely. It's about maintaining that vigilance and ensuring that those controls are consistently enforced.
Okay, so even if everything seems fine on the surface, those missing controls can be a sign of bigger problems lurking beneath.
Exactly. Auditors are trained to look for those subtle clues that might indicate a weakness in the system.
On to question 106, and we're back to firewalls, those trusty guardians of our networks.
Standing strong against those digital invaders.
But with so many different types of firewalls, which one offers the strongest protection?
While they each have their strengths, the screened subnet firewall is generally considered the most secure option.
Screen subnet. Sounds intense.
It's all about creating layers of defense. It combines a packet filtering router with a bastion host, all situated within a special zone called a DMZ.
Okay, break that down for me. What's a DMZ, and how does it all work together?
Think of a DMZ as a buffer zone between your internal network and the big bad internet. It's where you put those servers that need to be accessible from the outside world, like web servers or email servers.
So it's like a separate little fortress protecting those exposed servers?
Exactly. Now, the screen subnet firewall acts like a gatekeeper to that fortress. It uses a packet filtering router to screen all incoming traffic, blocking anything suspicious.
So it's like a first line of defense, weeding out the obvious threats.
Right. Then, the bastion host acts like a second line of defense. It's a heavily fortified server that further scrutinizes any traffic that makes it past the router.
So it's like having a moat and a castle wall, double the protection.
Exactly. The screen subnet firewall is all about creating that layered defense to keep those intruders at bay.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about having a single firewall. It's about creating that multi-layered approach to security.
Precisely. It's all about defense in depth, making it as difficult as possible for attackers to penetrate your network.
Okay, on to question 107, and we're dealing with SLA's service level agreements.
Those contracts that outline the services a provider will deliver.
But from an auditor's perspective, what's the biggest red flag to look out for in an SLA?
The most concerning issue is the absence of clear performance metrics. An SLA should specify exactly how the service will be measured, what the targets are, and how performance will be reported.
So it's not enough to just say, we'll provide good service.
Exactly. Good is subjective. You need those objective, measurable metrics to determine whether the provider is actually meeting their obligations.
Right. It's like having a contract that says, we'll build you a house, but doesn't specify the size, materials, or any other details.
Exactly. Those metrics are essential for holding the provider accountable and ensuring that you're getting what you paid for.
Okay, so those metrics provide that clarity and accountability. Now, question 108 takes us to the world of EDI, electronic data interchange.
The digital highway for business transactions.
But what's the biggest risk in this environment? What should auditors be most concerned about?
One of the most significant risks is the unauthorized manipulation of transactions. EDI systems often handle large volumes of sensitive financial data.
So if someone can tamper with those transactions, it could lead to some serious financial losses.
Exactly. That's why it's crucial to have strong security controls in place to prevent that kind of manipulation.
What kind of controls are we talking about?
Well, strong authentication and authorization controls are essential. You need to make sure that only authorized individuals have access to the system and that their actions are tracked.
So it's all about verifying identities and keeping a close eye on who's doing what.
Precisely. And encryption is another key control. You need to protect that data both while it's being transmitted and when it's stored.
So it's like having those digital bodyguards, making sure the data is safe and sound.
Exactly. And of course, robust logging and monitoring systems are also essential. They can help detect suspicious activity and provide that audit trail for investigations.
Okay, so it's that layered approach. Again, multiple controls working together to protect that sensitive data.
Exactly. You can't just rely on one security measure. You need that comprehensive strategy to cover all the bases.
Now, question 109 gets to the heart of data protection. What's the most important safeguard for software and data within a facility?
While physical security is important, don't underestimate the power of logical access controls.
Logical access control. So we're talking about the digital barriers, not the physical ones.
Exactly. These controls determine who can access what information and what they can do with it.
So things like strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, and least privilege access.
Precisely. These controls are crucial for protecting sensitive information in today's digital world.
Right, because even if someone manages to physically break into a facility, they won't get very far if they can't access the data itself.
Exactly. Logical access controls are the digital locks and keys that keep that data safe.
Okay, on to question 110. And we're back to the world of software development. We're talking about the early stages, the requirements definition phase. Why is it so important to involve quality assurance in this process?
It's all about preventing problems rather than just fixing them later on. QA should be involved from the get-go.
So it's not just about testing the software after it's built. It's about making sure it's designed with testability in mind.
Exactly. By involving QA early on, you can ensure that the requirements are clear, concise, and testable.
So it's about making sure those requirements are actually, well, requirement worthy.
Precisely. And that helps avoid costly rework and delays down the line.
So it's not just about building the right system, it's about building the system.
Exactly. And that's a key principle in secure software development, building security in from the ground up.
Great insights. I think our listeners are getting a good sense of the breadth and depth of knowledge required for the CISA exam.
It's definitely a challenging certification, but it's also incredibly rewarding. It shows that you're truly dedicated to the field of information security and that you have the skills to protect those valuable digital assets. All right, ready to dive into the next batch of questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, so question 111 tackles a trend that's only getting bigger, going completely wireless.
Yeah, cutting the cords, it's so tempting. But I bet there are some security headaches that come with ditching those wired networks.
Oh, absolutely. Wireless networks are super convenient, but they also open up a whole new can of worms when it comes to security.
Like what? What are the biggest concerns?
Well, the biggest one is probably the potential for someone snooping on company information. Unlike wired networks, where the data is traveling through physical cables, wireless signals, they can go beyond the walls of your building.
So it's kind of like having a private conversation in a public park. Anyone with the right equipment could be listening in.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have really strong security measures in place on any wireless network.
So we're talking about more than just a simple Wi-Fi password, right?
Right. You need to be using robust encryption protocols, things like WPA2 or WPA3, to protect that data as it's flying through the airwaves.
And I'm guessing strong authentication mechanisms are crucial too.
Oh, for sure. You want to make sure only authorized devices can connect to the network. Something like 802.1x authentication can really help with that.
So it's about having those multiple layers of security in place, not just relying on one thing.
Exactly. And don't forget to keep those security settings up to date. Those threats are always evolving.
Okay. Question 112 is about email encryption, another topic that comes up a lot these days.
Keeping those sensitive messages under wraps.
A company has a policy saying all emails have to be encrypted for confidentiality. But how can an auditor actually check if everyone's following the rules?
Well, it all comes down to understanding those encryption keys. To make sure only the intended recipient can read the message, it needs to be encrypted with their public key, and only their private key can unlock it.
So it's like sending a secret message in a locked box. Only the person with the right key can open it.
Exactly. And an auditor can verify that the system is working properly by digging into the email server's settings and logs.
So they're checking that the messages are actually being encrypted using the correct keys.
Right. They might even send some test emails to make sure they can only be opened by the intended recipient.
Okay, so it's not just about taking the company's word for it. It's about doing those checks and balances.
Exactly. Auditors need to verify, not just trust.
All right, question 113 brings us back to the physical world. We're talking about biometric systems protecting a data center.
Those high-tech scanners using fingerprints or iris scans to control access.
Sounds pretty secure.
Yeah.
But what are some potential vulnerabilities an auditor might be on the lookout for?
Well, even with biometrics, there are weak spots. One thing an auditor might focus on is the security of the data as it travels from those biometric scanners to the access control system.
So even if the fingerprint scan is legit, the data itself could be intercepted along the way.
Exactly. If that data isn't being sent over a secure, encrypted channel, it's vulnerable.
So it's like having a high-security door with a flimsy lock. It doesn't matter how strong the door is if the lock can be easily picked.
Exactly. You need that end-to-end security protecting the data at every stage.
Okay, question 114. Let's talk about neural networks. Those powerful tools often used in fraud detection.
Ah, yes. The brains behind many security systems.
But what makes them so good at sniffing out fraudulent activity?
Neural networks are like pattern recognition machines. They can analyze huge amounts of data and spot those subtle anomalies that might indicate something fishy is going on.
So they're like digital detectives looking for those tiny clues that humans might miss.
Exactly. They can process thousands of transactions per second, looking for unusual spending patterns, location discrepancies, attempts to use stolen credentials, all those red flags.
And they get smarter over time, right? Like the more data they analyze, the better they get at spotting those patterns.
Exactly. They learn from each transaction, refining their ability to detect fraud.
Okay, question 115 presents an interesting situation. An auditor finds that a database configuration doesn't match the original design documents.
Uh-oh. Sounds like someone might have been tinkering where they shouldn't have.
But what's the most appropriate course of action? Is it panic time, or is there a more measured approach?
The first step is to figure out if those changes were authorized and documented. There might be a perfectly valid reason for the discrepancy.
So don't jump to conclusions right away. Gather some more information first.
Exactly. The auditor should check the change management records, see if there's a log of the change, who approved it, and why it was made.
So it's all about following the audit trail, making sure everything is above board.
Right. If there's no documentation or if the change looks suspicious, then further investigation is definitely warranted.
Okay, so it's about being thorough and methodical, understanding the context before making any judgments.
Exactly. Auditing is all about gathering evidence and following the facts.
Now, question 116 takes us back to the data center we're talking about, protecting against power dips, those short interruptions in the electricity supply.
Ah, yes. Those can be real headaches for sensitive equipment.
What's the best way to keep those systems running smoothly even when the power flickers?
Uninterruptible power supplies, or UPSs for short, are your best bet in this scenario.
So they're like those backup batteries we have in our phones and laptops.
Exactly. They provide that temporary power source to keep things running until the main power comes back on.
So they prevent data loss, system crashes, all those nasty side effects of power problems.
Precisely. UPSs are like those trusty safety nets, keeping your critical systems up and running no matter what.
Okay, question 117 is about change control audits. The auditor finds that the change management process isn't formally documented, and, to make matters worse, some system migrations have failed.
Yikes. That's a recipe for disaster.
So what happens next? What should the auditor do in this situation?
Well, they need to get to the bottom of things. A root cause analysis is in order.
So it's about figuring out why those migrations went wrong and why there's no proper documentation.
Exactly. The auditor needs to gather evidence, talk to the people involved, analyze system logs, anything that can shed light on the situation.
So it's like being a detective, piecing together the clues to understand what went wrong.
Precisely. And the goal is not just to point fingers, but to identify those underlying causes and recommend solutions to prevent it from happening again.
Okay, so it's about making those systems more robust and reliable.
Exactly. Learning from mistakes and improving those processes.
All right. Question 118 delves into the world of certificate authorities, or CAs, those organizations that manage those digital certificates we talked about earlier.
Ah, yes. The guardians of trust on the internet.
But can CAs delegate any of their responsibilities to other organizations?
They can indeed. They often delegate certain tasks to registration authorities or RAs.
RAs, so it's kind of like a division of labor.
Exactly. RAs can handle things like verifying the identity of applicants, processing certificate requests, and distributing those certificates.
So the CAs set the standards and oversee the whole process, while the RAs do the day-to-day work.
Right. It's all about efficiency and making sure those certificates are issued and managed properly.
Okay, question 119 is all about portability, making sure an application can be easily moved or adapted to different environments.
Ah, the joys of system migration.
But what's a key factor in ensuring that portability, especially when we're talking about applications connected to databases?
One of the most important things is using standardized languages and protocols. For example, if the application uses SQL or structured query language to talk to the database, it'll be much easier to move that application to another database system that also understands SQL.
So it's like having a universal language for data. No matter where the application goes, it can still communicate with the database.
Exactly. And it's not just about the database. Using standard communication protocols like HTTP or HTTPS for web applications can also make a huge difference.
Right. It's about avoiding those proprietary systems that can lock you into a specific vendor or platform.
Precisely. Portability is all about flexibility and freedom of choice.
Okay, and finally, question 120 asks, How to ensure that future IT projects are better aligned with business needs.
Ah, the age-old challenge of bridging the gap between IT and the business.
So who are the best people to ask for insights on how to make those projects more successful?
The most valuable insights often come from the end users themselves.
Ah, the people who actually use those systems day in and day out.
Exactly. They're the ones who know what works, what doesn't work, and what could be improved.
So it's about tapping into that user experience, getting their feedback, and understanding their needs.
Exactly. User feedback is a goldmine of information that can help shape those future IT projects and ensure they deliver real value to the business.
Okay, so it's not just about building technically sound systems. It's about building systems that meet the real needs of the people who use them.
Absolutely. Technology should support the business, not hinder it.
This has been a great discussion so far. Our listeners are definitely getting a crash course in the world of CISA and all things information security.
And we're just getting started. Still plenty more to explore in this deep dive. Feeling like CISA experts yet?
I think our brains are definitely full after tackling all those questions.
It's a lot to take in, but hey, that's why we're doing these deep dives, breaking it down into manageable chunks.
Right, we've covered so much ground. Digital certificates, documentation, firewalls, disaster recovery, even those tricky neural networks.
It really shows you how broad the field of information security is, so many different areas to consider.
It's not just about being a tech whiz. It's about understanding the business impact, the risk management side of things, even human behavior.
Exactly. The CISA certification really emphasizes that holistic view, being able to assess and advise on IT systems from all angles.
So for our listeners who are working towards their CISA certification, what's your top tip? What helped you the most when you were studying for the exam?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing is to focus on understanding the concepts, not just memorizing the answers.
Ah, so it's about the why, not just the what.
Exactly. If you can grasp the underlying principles, you'll be much better equipped to apply that knowledge in real-world situations, not just on the exam.
That's great advice. And for those who aren't necessarily pursuing certifications but just want to stay informed about cybersecurity, what's one key takeaway from today's deep dive?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the IT department's problem.
Right. We all have a role to play in protecting sensitive information, whether it's our own personal data or the data we handle at work.
Exactly. Being aware of the risks, practicing good security habits, speaking up when we see something suspicious, those actions can make a huge difference.
And remember, cybersecurity is an ever-evolving field. The threats are constantly changing, so we need to stay informed and adapt.
Couldn't agree more. Complacency is the enemy.
Well said. I think everyone listening is feeling a bit more empowered to tackle those cybersecurity challenges. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely. And we're all in this together.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of CISA and information security. We hope you found it helpful and maybe even a little bit fun.
If you're looking for more information, don't forget to check out the show notes for links to all the resources we mentioned.
And as always, if you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on social media or through our website.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Stay curious, keep learning, and stay safe out there in the digital world.
Until next time.